how is the FDA changing its thinking in a way that is going to impact entire industries, impact patients? Where is the FDA falling down on the job in certain areas, or where is there conflict or disagreement? And what does that mean for the American public?
Hello, I'm Wayne Pines, and welcome to bonus episode 10 of our podcast, FDA Watch. Before I introduce our guest, I want to remind you that if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so. Go to fdawatch.net or wherever you get your podcast. It's the only way to ensure that you won't miss a single episode of the podcast, including bonus episodes like this. Right now, we're doing a series of episodes with the law firm Covington, covering medical device regulation, compliance, and policies. We have a somewhat different kind of guest today. We have the reporters who cover FDA. I started out my career in Washington as a reporter for the Pink Sheet. That was many years ago. Two of the reporters we have on today did or are working at the Pink Sheet, and that was before Stat and before Politico and before some of the online publications that we have today that are also covering FDA. But I'm going to share during this podcast some of my own experiences as a reporter covering the FDA. Our first guest is Lizzy Lawrence. Lizzy leads Stat's FDA coverage. She was previously a medical devices reporter in 2024. She was part of a team that won the Polk Award for an investigation into United Health. And earlier in her career, she wrote about Silicon Valley workplaces for the tech news site Protocol. Welcome to FDA Watch, Lizzy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also joining us today is Sarah Karlin-Smith. Sarah is now the research director for Public Citizens Access to Medicines program. She recently joined them. She spent 15 years as a journalist covering health policy and politics with a focus on drug development and pricing. She was at the Pink Sheet. And as I mentioned before, I started my job at the Pink Sheet. So we had the same job, Sarah, at one point. Welcome to FDA Watch, Sarah. And thanks for joining us, even though you're no longer officially a journalist. But once you're a journalist, you're always a journalist.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy I still get to be an honorary FDA journalist.
Right. Derrick Gingery is executive editor for U.S. Regulatory and Policy Insights at the Pink Sheet. Been a journalist for more than 25 years, has won several awards, joined the Pink Sheet in 2010. He also hosts Drug Fix, the Pink Sheet's pharma regulatory podcast. Welcome to FDA Watch, Derrick.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's start our discussion from your perspective as longtime FDA reporters. This year has been, I'm not going to say the most exciting, but one of the most exciting, certainly one of the most change-worthy. Looking at it from a 30,000-foot level, if you had to pick one or two of the overriding themes about FDA coverage over the last year, what is it? Lizzy, I want to start with you. Talk about the themes. You know, what emerges from looking at FDA for the last year?
Great question. I would say that one of the biggest themes is the sort of the erosion between the erosion of the wall between politics and science at the agency. And of course, there has been political influence at the FDA before, but I think I've just, in so many of my stories over the past year, there have just been instances where the White House or HHS is weighing in more on kind of individual regulatory decisions in a way that would be, pretty abnormal in the past. So that's one big theme. So the other theme I would say is personnel turmoil. We've seen a lot of layoffs across government with DOGE, but then also at the FDA, there's been a lot of departures of longtime leaders who were either forced out or retired. So the kind of impact of that churn, that loss of expertise, I think is another big theme to follow.
Derrick, let me turn to you. What do you see thematically?
I'm dating myself here, Wayne, but I mean, my thought was that song by the Cars called "Shake It Up." Um, like Lizzy was saying, I mean, the change in the way political appointees are kind of weighing in on individual regulatory decisions. We didn't see that before. We've just seen a lot of just kind of changes to policy that in the past had really been kind of bedrock. If you want to think about that, like really predictable stuff, and now you're kind of seeing an agency that really has kind of lost a lot of its predictability just because of the way a lot of these new senior leaders have changed the way the agency has traditionally thought about a lot of issues, but and also just how they've gone in and attacked some individual applications as well. So companies, I think, are trying to figure out how to kind of navigate this new environment, and with all of this uncertainty that's been kind of created here, just because of the different approach and different way of thinking. So yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest theme for me.
Sarah?
Yeah, I hate to sound repetitive, but I think I kind of characterized 2025 as sort of the year of the unpredictable FDA. There was not only a lot of changes, whether it be leadership, kind of general career staffing, and so forth, but it just became an agency that was much harder to sort of trust that you sort of knew what they were going to do and when. And we've seen that with a lot of drug approval decisions the past year, and just advice that seems to kind of, there's a lot of flip-flopping of positions and advice and inconsistency in what they're thinking, I think, compared to FDAs of the past. And again, I think really hitting on the sort of meddling of politicals in FDA drug-specific approval decisions and applications is really quite unique, and in a world in a like a U.S. political environment that was quieter, I guess is maybe the best way to put it, than 2025 was. There's so many FDA stories that might have been like these front page, above the fold, top of the, news hour kind of scandal almost for like weeks or months, in terms of that barely broke through because of how much news was going on. But, Lizzy and her colleague at Stat, Daniel, had a really great piece out today, or two pieces out today, talking about how that's also now just shifted dynamics around how companies are engaging with FDA and having lobbyists push different parts of the federal government and the FDA around drug approvals in ways that were never before seen. So I think those are two really big themes that tell you how much kind of dynamics around how FDA operations have moved over a pretty short period of time.
Yeah, I want to get right into how industry has responded. Lizzy, let you address that. What's going on? The industry over the last year has been relatively quiet in terms of some of this. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it seems that it's taken the industry a really long time to speak up. And I think recently there has been a little bit more pushback, especially from smaller biotech companies that really their fates are determined by a positive or negative single FDA decision, right? So we're starting to see some kind of concern about the unpredictability, instability of the agency. We're starting to see more public pushback, but like Sarah said, there is. I had this story out today with my colleague Daniel, where we had been talking to folks in the lobbyists, pharma lobbyists, who were pointing out that in the past, the agency has been so protected, has been more protected from political influence, and now it's very permeable. And so there's now kind of this every man for himself mentality, where companies are hiring Trump White House aligned lobbying firms to not only hiring people that have expertise, regulatory policy expertise, but hiring people that have more connections, are more skilled at gaining favor from the White House, in order to kind of make the FDA work for their individual company. So you're sort of seeing a splintering, instead of a cohesive push from industry to try to lift all tides, have the certainty that is helpful in developing innovative drugs and devices.
Yeah, Derrick, do you see that the same way? And to what do you attribute the industry's response, or how do you characterize it, I should ask?
I mean, I understand what Lizzie's saying. I largely agree with that. I mean, you saw it with the refuse to file action on the Moderna mRNA flu vaccine. There was a lot of backlash to that came out relatively quickly from from some industry groups and some other people, just talking about the destruction of the vaccine development um, you know community with something like that, because of the extra uncertainty that they created with that. Um, it, it I think industry is sort of kind of learning. Like I said, they're kind of learning on the fly how to navigate this and how to be successful in this new environment. And to some extent, it took a while to kind of figure that out. I mean, you saw with the most favored nation drug pricing agreements, that was kind of seen as kind of one angle to use to kind of deal with the issues with the tariffs and try and show that you're lowering drug prices, and which is one of the priorities of the White House. So like I said, I think they're trying to learn to navigate how to this new environment, and kind of where they can be successful, where they can push back and actually get some get some response, and maybe some changes to things they don't like.
Yeah, Sarah, let me ask you the same question, but I want to add another question. You're now with Public Citizen, and so you have somewhat of a different perspective, perhaps. But would you expect to have heard more from the consumer and patient communities and the medical communities with regard to the changes that were occurring at FDA?
That's a tough one. I don't know. I felt like over the past year or so that there have been a lot of consumer, various like medical society groups speaking up and raising concerns about what's happening at FDA and what's happening maybe in the sort of science health agencies more broadly. Um, Now, I'm not always sure how much that's broken through, again, because of just the amount of news going on in all different areas of the country, and the kind of national government change, not just in health. Um, but I do think there have been some like pretty big success stories, particularly I think in the vaccine space, of how groups have kind of band together and come up with ways to kind of be a counterpart to the federal government to try and get good vaccine information out there. I think honestly, the area that I've been most surprised to some extent where you've seen a quieter sort of response is from the industry more directly. I think it's challenging for them to figure out how to navigate this dynamic and where it is to their benefit to go out strong publicly and, criticize how this government is operating and where that might actually lead to more harm for them. So I think, we've seen more of the other groups that might at times be aligned with industry and at times not, but be the ones sort of pushing back here. And even, it seems like industry is doing whatever industry is doing to sort of shift or, change things at FDA. It seems like it's going on a much quieter level behind the scenes, not very like overt and publicly.
Let me shift gears a little bit. When I was covering FDA for the Pink Sheet, uh, I used to literally walk the halls, because you could walk the halls then. Now you're not allowed in the building without an escort. And I used to stop by the office of people, and we used to talk. And there was a much greater freedom, exchange of information that perhaps exists now. I want to start with you, Sarah, since you're no longer a reporter, but you were for 15 years covering the FDA and healthcare, and then ask Derrick and Lizzy, how do you cover FDA these days? What does a reporter do on a daily basis to cover the FDA?
Wayne, your comment makes me sad because even, I was in high school when 9/11 happened. And that's really my understanding from talking to people is like sort of the big shift in what made FDA so much less inaccessible after that to reporters. So, I always covered an FDA that was, had pretty limited access in terms of like your ability to just meet and, socialize with rank and file staff members. But I think, you spend a lot of time going out to other meetings that may be more accessible where FDA people are, even if it's not at FDA, obviously reading, lots of FDA documents, covering government meetings, going to the Hill where you may see people that interplay. I think the one change that's perhaps to our reporters' favor now is obviously while you can't walk around the halls of FDA, there's all these different technologies to find people on the internet and apps, to communicate. So you end up developing kind of relationships with people you can find like on LinkedIn and at other parts of the FDA. And, I think particularly this past year or so has, motivated more rank and file kind of FDA staffers to be willing to engage a little bit more with reporters, at least anonymously, to let them know kind of what's going on at the agency. Of course, notably to the frustration of some of the high level staff there. So there are ways to kind of replicate the like walking around dynamic, but it's a little bit more challenging to actually sort of like, maybe a little bit more awkward to sort of just like cold call some of these people than if you could just stumble into their office.
Right. Derrick, any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Sarah was saying. I mean, you're trying to get in front of people, at least so they put a face with your name or your email or whatever, and at least feel somewhat comfortable speaking with you. One thing I've noticed too is that a lot of these kind of in-person events that we used to go to a lot. The FDA used to. I mean, they still speak at a fair number of conferences and other events and so forth, but there aren't as many, and the ones they are at, they like you used to be able to grab the commissioner or grab the CEDAR director or grab the CBER director kind of on the sidelines in the hallway after they were done speaking and ask questions about things you didn't understand or things you wanted to hear about, you wanted to know some more about, and they would just have a conversation with you. They were comfortable with that. That still goes on to an extent, but I think it's a little less now. I think there's just kind of a natural whatever you want to call it, fear, aversion of the press. So some of that it has changed. I think too, a lot of the staff that handled PR for the agency is gone now, either through the RIF or voluntary departures and other means, and so um, when we like at Pinkshi, we sometimes have some more technical questions that we have to ask for about issues that have come up, and we used to have. I mean, there was a team of people in Cedar they were called Cedar Trade Press because that was their job, was to answer these extra technical questions that we had sometimes, and those people are all gone now. So there's the way they kind of run their kind of the routine, like we need to comment on X, Y, or Z now, either through HHS's press office, which then sends it to the FDA to get an answer, and then it kind of goes back, and it's bouncing around. I would say that's really different than it's been in the past.
Yeah, Lizzy, how do you cover FDA?
Yeah, I wish that I could waltz around the hallways of White Oak. That sounds awesome. Yeah, I agree with what Sarah and Derrick were saying. I mean, I started covering FDA September 2024. Before that, I was covering devices, so I would interact with the agency mainly in that capacity. But it was definitely possible and easier to get officials on the record if I gave the agency enough time with an inquiry. And now it's very difficult. And yeah, I think that there is a fear. Um, there's more. Yeah, I would say there's some of the career staffers are definitely motivated to share what's happening at the agency anonymously, and LinkedIn has been great for that as far as sourcing and trying to get to the bottom of things. But yeah, but they're not going to meetings. Like I do see less FDA staff out and about. And yeah, you definitely have to be creative in trying to source and talk to people that can help you understand what's going on.
Yeah. Derrick, do people at FDA sometimes call you up and give you news?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that happens. I'm sure Sarah and Lizzy would say the same thing. That still happens quite a bit. It's one of those days where you're like, "Oh, I got lucky today. Somebody called me." But yeah, it's I would say that the news comes in, from just random calls. I mean, emails, other LinkedIn messages, like Lizzy was saying. Yeah, that happens definitely still.
Yeah. Sarah, same question for you. I know people aren't calling you now, but when you were a reporter just a few months ago, uh, would people just call you up and offer some inside information?
Yeah, I think you get some amount of just sort of random tidbits from people either somehow connected to or interested in the outcomes of FDA. I think that the biggest change, recently is that how FDA is interacting with reporters on like a formal basis. Like Derek stressed, there's just the HHS is handles so much of like the FDA's more formal press communications these days and messaging and stuff. So I do think you notice the difference in sort of those more formal interactions of the kinds of answers you can get out of the agency on topics and the level of like really understanding you can get from the press office on some of the what kinds of questions they're even capable of answering and those sorts of things. Much harder to get like formal interviews and things set up these days.
Lizzy, Dr. Makari does frequent videos to announce new initiatives. As a member of the press, how do you feel about his reaching out directly with videos, which are on LinkedIn and which are on YouTube and which are readily accessible? Usually he would go to the press and the press would report that, but now he's doing his own videos.
Yes, he does. He loves videos and podcasts, and he is very good, I would say, at getting out in front of getting out on cable news, especially, and does do um, lots of those types of interviews. I think it's, the more interfacing with the public that a commissioner does, the better. I will say it allows him to present things in an unchallenged way a lot of the time. Like, a lot of the interviews that he does are with more friendlier outlets or people who are not going to ask him as tough questions. So I would like to see, that's part of the benefit of, granting interviews with folks in the trade press, who can really get into the nitty gritty a little bit more, and challenge him a little bit more. So I don't think there's anything wrong in posting videos and being active on social media. I think that's great, but it would be good to balance that out with more traditional press interviews as well.
Right. Derrick, do you have access directly to the leadership of FDA?
No, it's an easy answer. No. We asked for interviews. Sometimes they get granted. A lot of times they don't. And it is what it is. I would, I would just to build on Lizzie's comments on the videos. I would throw in to that the policy pronouncements, like the journal article that this FDA has been doing a lot, as opposed to like guidance and rulemaking, which has been the traditional routes. Now, I know, um, the idea is that you can get the journal article can get printed and out to the industry and the other stakeholders a lot faster, but you don't, like Lizzie was saying with the videos and some of the interviews, you don't get there's no public comment associated with that. There's no updating of the article after the public comment if there are things that industry has said are not workable and so forth. So yeah, I would throw that in there too. It's just kind of it's just a way, another way to kind of be able to do what you want to do for them.
Yeah, Sarah, you were a reporter for 15 years. Uh, how has the way that you covered FDA 15 years ago and the way you cover it now, or did, changed? What happened in that 15 years in terms of the way that a reporter covers the agency?
No, I think like the internet and social media really took off in a different way. So, McCary's video, Instagram, all the apps that he's on, I think is sort of an extension of what I think Scott Gottlieb, in my mind, was kind of the first FDA commissioner that really very proactively like cultivated his own sort of brand and voice on social media, in a way that I don't remember other FDA commissioners really kind of proactively trying to control the media narrative to that extent by them, almost by themselves, not relying on a lot of staff. So I think that's changed. I mean, even just the fact that you'll often see, like in a major HHS or FDA press release, come through first on LinkedIn than you will via email or even on their website. So I just think where news hits first is a bit different. Like Derrick, I think, alluded to a little bit before, the COVID pandemic and sort of move to lots of things being online certainly shifted dynamics, because even as some things have now gone back to being in person, there's many more like hybrid opportunities or things that not haven't gone back to being in person. So again, there's just more virtual interaction these days. So just figuring out how to meet and keep up with different contacts in a more remote world. I mean, the other big thing I think I noticed during my like FDA journalism career is just as you alluded to too, there's been like a rise of new media outlets, as much as, there's obviously been, I think, demise of certain, media outlets over time in the US, but there's also been the rise of outlets like Politico, which has really cultivated and changed, sort of competed with traditional trade news outlets in different ways, getting some of the same news they were covering out faster, but maybe without the same depth. So, um, in some ways, I think, in the healthcare space, there's really been a lot of like more vibrant competition around covering FDA and this world, than we've seen in other areas of news. So there's been more innovation, I think, in the types of outlets and how they're covering the agency than maybe in other areas.
Okay. We're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're back. Turning back to Lizzy to kick off the second part of our interview. There's always a lot of information in the FDA area. There's so many press releases, so many announcements. How do you decide what gets your attention?
It's very challenging these days. There's a lot of competing. There's a lot of competing news in this era, even within FDA. I would say, given the themes that we brought up at the beginning of political pressure at FDA and in general just kind of instability, if there is a piece of news that comes out at the agency, and I've gotten word from sources that not everything is as it seems with this news. For example, with the Moderna news from last week or whenever that was, maybe a few weeks ago, when Vinay Prasad refused to file their flu vaccine application. That was newsworthy on its own, but then this element where I learned that actually staff had thought it was reviewable, that obviously rises, that becomes the thing that I want to be paying most attention to. So I think in every administration, or in every FDA, the most newsworthy things are, is what brand new, how is the FDA changing its thinking in a way that is going to impact entire industries, impact patients? Where is the FDA falling down on the job in certain areas, or where is there conflict or disagreement, and what does that mean for the American public?
Yeah. Derrick, how do you decide what you're going to cover? What's important enough to be covered?
We try and think about, what is, what is going to have the what kind of impact is this going to have on the agency, or is it going to have on industry? Is it something that's going to help, drug development programs? Is it going to help regulatory affairs departments? Is it going to help, is this kind of information that they're going to be able to use to do their jobs better? So that certainly, goes into it. But, like Lizzy was saying, certainly details like she was talking about with the, in the Moderna vaccine, obviously that's going to be, high on the list too. But yeah, it's just kind of, we kind of think about, is this something, I mean, it sounds silly, but, is this something that people need to know?
Sarah, any comments on what criteria you use to decide what's news? As a former reporter myself, I know in this field you can choose from a dozen things or more every week as to what to cover, and you've got to decide how you're going to spend your time. What criteria did you apply?
I think some of the things we would think about, right, is sort of like what is the scope of the impact? and, in terms of the populations impacted, how precedented or unprecedented is it? Is it typical agency action, or are they doing something atypical, and what is the reason for that? Whether it falls within the realm of legality or norms, or trying to sort of put the pulse on like bigger trends, to help people really understand, not just what happened to one company or one product at FDA, but to try and like distill that broader meaning of what it means for how people can expect FDA to be working these days, and how it can impact like the broader drug development landscape and the range of products that aren't making it to people. So I think that's like a really key thing to think about, is to find the stories that have that, that kind of can help distill those broader pieces of information. um, and you want to balance both what you have a certain audience and what they need to know, with also what just is sort of like the most important to the public interest, and people most need to know. But it's certainly challenging these days.
I want to shift gears, talk about advisory committees. Derrick, I have an image of you sitting next to the wall at an FDA advisory committee with your computer plugged into the electrical outlet and feeding out, reports during the day as to what was going on. Um, I have to confess, I detested sitting through advisory committees. I didn't have to do it as a reporter. I was involved when I was associate commissioner in establishing advisory committees. So I never covered them as a reporter. But let me ask you this: do you miss the fact that there are so few advisory committees? Was that an importance? Was that that was a story a week? If there was one a week, do you miss that?
Yeah, it was a few stories a week, if because you had the documents coming out ahead of time, and then you had the meeting itself, and then you had a bunch of issues that came up during the meeting that were worth writing about after you were done. So yeah, I mean, I don't miss the day. I mean, the day itself was a long day, and it was taxing because it was just a 12-hour day working. But the advisory committees themselves, I wish they still had them, because I mean, it the for an agency that likes to talk about transparency and increasing transparency, and we're going to have radical transparency, and we're doing all these things that like releasing complete response letters that would, I never thought that would happen, to increase transparency. And then we haven't had an advisory committee meeting in, what is it, 9 months now or something. They just scheduled one for next month. um, and that was an outlet where they could do a lot of the things that they're talking about doing to increase transparency, where, like, you could talk about the issues you have with an application in a public forum and not worry about risking litigation or disclosing confidential commercial information and things like that. You could talk about the way, policy directions and the way you're thinking about certain policies and ideas and so forth. And it's largely gone away, at least for the moment. So yeah, I in that way I miss advisory committees, because I miss everything that came along with them.
Lizzy, any comments on the advisory committee?
Yeah, no, I miss them. I mean, I didn't really get to cover that many of them, I guess. Because yeah, throughout all of 2025, there were very few.
Mm-hmm.
But I did get to cover some as a device reporter, and I found them. I mean, yeah, as Derrick was saying, it's a long day, but it was helpful to get a sense of the differing viewpoints on an application, and really, um, give the public a chance to comment or raise questions about the therapy or give their feedback. So I do think it's a shame that we're seeing less of those.
Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the big loss to not having advisory committees is that there's so much information that FDA says, is protected commercial information of industries that it can't disclose. It can't even tell you if a company doesn't tell you that an application hasn't been filed with it, right?
I set that rule.
Well, might have a bone to pick with you. That's for another time.
When I was at FDA, I used to run the Freedom of Information System, and that was something that I established that even the existence of an NDA or a BLA was, could be regarded as confidential financial or commercial information that the agency should not disclose unless the company had disclosed it. That was sort of the criteria. That's where you're left in terms of the way that the FOIA rule. That's the way that you're left in terms of the way that the FOIA law is written. So I know where that came from.
Yeah, so without the advisory committees, you really lost this one incredibly valuable pre-approval opportunity to get a wealth of information about the drug application and what FDA was thinking about it, that you otherwise don't get. And you often, without FDA weighing in an advisory committee, you often just don't get the FDA voice at all. But what you do get, of course, is a company that is able to completely control the narrative. And unfortunately, there have been instances where companies, obviously, they try and put a spin on it that's maybe once you actually see what FDA has told them privately or and things like that, it turns out that the company story is a little bit not quite the full picture, the total truth, or maybe there's differences of opinion. And I think, obviously, I don't expect the average member of the public to be reading FDA advisory committee approval, advisory committee documents or to be listening to these meetings. But certainly it's a really valuable touch point for regulatory experts, scholars in the space, other companies who want to see, how FDA is handling competitor products, journalists who can then translate that to a general public. And that's really one of my biggest concerns is, the FDA is a public agency funded by taxpayers and whose primary mission is to, help protect the health and safety and of, the American public. And there sometimes feels like there are just so few avenues to ensure it's acting in, the public's interest and being held accountable. And while I do appreciate the complete response letter change this year, it's hard to see that as the win that it is when there's been these other places where we've had a lot less transparency.
So, Sarah, you're now no longer a reporter, from being outside the reporting process now. What do you think is the most important story or stories that you would like to see covered at the agency? What needs more attention from your present perch?
So, in fairness, I'm more focused now on the pricing and reimbursement side of things. So, and I think I've only been gone a month, but it seems like the FDA press corps has done a really good job of covering some of the top topics, at hand, like this situation with Moderna and the refuse to file. I guess one thing I'd be interested if, reporters kind of digging in and reporting more on, not that they haven't already, but sort of this interesting, unique overlap that's happened between FDA and other parts of the Trump administration in terms of linking the receipt of these new commissioner priority vouchers to commitments made to the White House with the most favored nation deal. I'd be interested to see what more has gone on behind the scenes there in terms of, you know, what's truly being kind of committed to, and this like unusual tying in of the pricing dynamic, which is usually outside of FDA world, to stuff in FDA world. Um, so that's, you know, one thing I'm kind of like interested to see, I guess, if we get some more information about how these dynamics have been, you know, shifted over the past few months.
Final question for Lizzy and Derrick. Lizzy, take out your crystal ball. What are you going to be covering for the next year at FDA? You know, what are the big stories that you expect to emerge over the next year? I'm going to ask Derrick the same question.
Okay, taking out the crystal ball. I would say I wrote a story about this. I wrote a story about the three things to watch in 2026. I believe, yeah, well, one of them is still vaccine policy. That is something that I think it was CNN or Politico. Someone had a great piece on how HHS and the White House is trying to shift attention away from vaccines with the midterms and with the kind of restricting access to vaccines being, not very politically popular. So, but we've already HHS, they've cut down the vaccine schedule. They've reconstituted the vaccine advisory panel at CDC. There's been so many things that, and within FDA, there's been a lot too with this Moderna news. So I will be watching to see if that really is as quiet as the Trump White House seems to want it to be, or if this is one of Secretary Kennedy's passions, is you know is kind of reshaping vaccine policy. Um, Food, interested in food. Feel like we didn't see a lot on food in the FDA last year, or as much as I expected, with that being such a core part of Make America Healthy Again. So we'll be watching to see what happens with the additives or if there are any other dramatic food policies. And I'm curious about rare disease too. There was this news this week that the FDA is rolling out a new pathway for, individualized therapies. But at the same time, there's been a lot of high profile rejections of rare disease drugs that seem to have gone against guidance that the agency previously gave. So looking at that contradiction where it seems like the companies that are sort of under biologics chief and Prasad's purview, or there seems to be a higher bar for approval, but also the agency is trying to say that they're going to be very flexible with rare disease. I'm very curious to see how that goes.
Derrick, crystal ball.
A couple of things that came to mind was FDA staffing is one big thing. I mean, and it's no surprise to anybody that's listening to this, last year with the reduction in force and the voluntary departure programs, and then the voluntary departures on top of the encouraged departures, the FDA lost a lot of people there, and a lot of stakeholders have been kind of trying to predict when that impact is going to start actually translating to, whether it's missed user fee goals or missed meeting scheduling or whatever other things that are going to slow down application reviews. They're trying to hire some of those people back, replace some of those people. But it's been kind of slow going just because of the nature of the federal hiring process and so forth. So I'm going to be watching that to see if they're able to, kind of replenish the rank and file that they've lost, as well as the senior leadership. I mean, and Lizzy's reported on this, and Sarah was too when she was here. She was still with the Pink Sheet. Are all those senior FDA leaders going to stick around? Is something going to happen that causes them to change their minds? Are they going to feel like I've done enough and it's time for me to leave? That's always kind of in the back of your mind. The other thing is the user fee program for me, just because this is my fourth PDUFA renewal that I've covered now. It's a huge bill, or it's a huge agreement, which gets turned into an even bigger bill, legislative package once it's ready to go. It's the FDA literally can't live without it now, and it's going to, it includes a bunch of process changes, but this time around, the FDA is, and probably through some of their political appointees, is trying to include, what they're calling America First policies into the agreement, which industry hasn't been too happy about. So I'm watching the negotiations to kind of see, do they compromise on those? Do they get left out? Is there some kind of impasse that develops? That sort of thing. It's a they still have several months to go to kind of get these agreements negotiated. But they have to finish them up. They have to send them to Capitol Hill by January of next year. But there's so many steps in that process that it really has to be done probably by the spring or early summer, to get through all the reviews and the public release and so forth that has to come along with it before it can go to Capitol Hill. So the deadline's coming up quickly, but those are two things that I'm watching.
Yeah. How do you cover user fees process?
The negotiations are private, of course, but we're lucky in that they're required by law to issue minutes of the meetings. So we get every few weeks, there's kind of a regular, drumbeat of minutes being released. So, you can read through those, and then, you hear things with people talking at meetings about what they're seeing in the negotiations, and things like that. But that's how we try and keep track of it up until we see the actual finished and reviewed agreement at the very end.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Lizzy and Sarah and Derrick for joining the show. I hope the three of you enjoyed talking about what you do for a living. I think I had an easier time when I was a reporter because, as I said before, I used to literally walk the halls, and I would walk into an office and I would hand them a copy of the pink sheet for the week, and they would hand me back a document and said, "Gee, I thought you might be interested in this, and maybe your readers would." And there was a lot of that going on when I was covering, but that doesn't take place anymore. It's a whole different environment, a whole different way of covering the agency. I want to thank our podcast creator and producer, Michael Levin Epstein, our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister. I want to ask that if you want to be a marketing partner or a sponsor, or just comment on the show, you can contact us at info@fdawatch.net. That's info@fdawatch.net. And don't forget, if you have not subscribed, please do so. Finally, if you're so inclined, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Wherever you get your podcasts, it really does make a difference. So, as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, you can read the pink sheet, you can read STAT, you can read other publications that our reporters cover here today, but you can also listen to FDA Watch. See you next time.